The night Evan Cole dragged his drunk boss from the jaws of a speeding truck, he had no idea she was his boss at all. He just saw a broken woman stumbling barefoot into traffic during the worst storm in a decade. By morning, she'd vanished from his couch like a ghost. But when Grace Harlow, CEO of the very company whose floors he mopped, showed up at his door the next night, stone cold sober, she brought with her a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew about survival, sacrifice, and second chances. Stay with me until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. The rain didn't fall that October night. It attacked. Evan Cole kept his head down as he walked, one hand shielding his face, the other clutching the strap of his worn canvas bag. The wind shrieked through the narrow streets of downtown, tearing at awnings and hurling trash cans across intersections like toys. Water gushed from storm drains, turning gutters into rivers. The city had issued warnings all day. Stay inside, shelter in place, don't travel unless absolutely necessary. But Evan Cole didn't have the luxury of choice. His shift at Harlow Industries had ended at midnight, and the last bus had already stopped running. The walk home was 3 miles through the industrial district, past shuttered warehouses and empty lots where the streetlights flickered like dying stars. He'd made this walk 1,000 times before, in rain, in snow, in the suffocating heat of summer, because this was what you did when you were a single father working night security for $11 an hour. You walked. You endured. You survived. The storm had other plans. Thunder cracked overhead so loud Evan felt it in his chest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the world in stark, colorless flashes. He was soaked through within minutes, his jacket clinging to his shoulders, water squishing in his boots with every step. His phone was dead, had been dead since yesterday when he couldn't afford to pay the electric bill, and had to choose between charging it at work or keeping the lights on at home for Liam. He'd chosen Liam. He always chose Liam. His son was 8 years old, asleep in their cramped apartment 6 blocks away, watched over by Mrs. Chen from next door. The elderly woman never asked for payment, just brought over dumplings on Sundays and told Evan he reminded her of her own son, who died young. Evan never asked how. Some wounds you didn't poke. He was thinking about Liam, about the school permission slip he needed to sign for the field trip, about the hole in the boy's sneakers that was getting too big to ignore when he saw her. At first he thought she was a bundle of rags caught against the median, but then she moved, lurching forward into the street, and Evan's heart stopped. She was barefoot. Her dress, expensive, even Evan could tell that much, hung in tatters around her knees. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and she walked with the loose, boneless stumble of someone who'd drunk themselves past caring. She swayed into the middle of the intersection, directly into the path of an oncoming truck whose headlights cut through the rain like knives. Evan didn't think. His bag hit the pavement as he ran, his boots slapping through puddles, his lungs burning. The truck's horn blared, a long, angry scream, and the woman turned toward it with the slow, dreamy curiosity of the deeply intoxicated. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't try to move. She just stood there, swaying, as 2 tons of steel bore down on her. Evan hit her from the side, wrapping both arms around her waist and driving them both toward the curb. They landed hard on the sidewalk, Evan taking the brunt of the impact on his shoulder. Pain exploded through his collarbone, but he held on, rolling them away from the street as the truck roared past, its tires spraying a wave of filthy water over them both. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing and the drum of rain on concrete. Then the woman laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was hollow, broken, the kind of laugh that came from a place beyond despair. She was small in his arms, fragile in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the way she seemed to be collapsing inward, like a star dying in slow motion. "Why?" she slurred, her words thick and clumsy. "Why'd you do that?" Evan pushed himself up on one elbow, still holding her. "Because you were about to die. That was the point." She tried to pull away, but she had no strength. Her eyes, green, Evan noticed, even in the dark, were glassy and unfocused. "Let me go." "Not a chance." "You don't know me." "Don't need to." Evan got to his feet, then reached down and hauled her up. She swayed against him, and he caught her before she could fall. "Come on, can't stay here. I live—" She gestured vaguely at nothing. Somewhere. Penthouse? Big windows? Can't remember. Great, Evan thought. She's blackout drunk. He looked around. The streets were deserted, every sensible person sheltering indoors. No cabs. No cops. No help. He pulled out his phone. Dead, right? He'd forgotten, and cursed under his breath. The woman was starting to shiver, her teeth chattering. Hypothermia was a real possibility. He could leave her at a hospital, maybe, but the nearest ER was 10 blocks away and she'd never make it. That left one option. Okay, Evan said, more to himself than to her. Okay, you're coming with me. She didn't protest when he bent and scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he'd expected, all sharp angles and delicate bones. She rested her head against his chest and murmured something he couldn't hear over the storm. Evan adjusted his grip and started walking. The journey home took twice as long as usual. Evan's shoulder throbbed where he'd hit the pavement, and his arms burned from carrying the dead weight of a grown woman through a hurricane. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop, because somewhere in his apartment, Liam was sleeping, trusting that his father would come home, and Evan had made a promise after Sarah died. He would always come home, even if he had to carry a stranger through hell to do it. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling fragments that didn't quite form sentences. Once she said, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Another time, "It should have been me." Evan didn't ask. People said all kinds of things when they were drunk and broken, and none of it was his business. His building finally came into view, a squat, tired structure with peeling paint and windows covered in iron bars. Evan took the stairs 2 at a time, the woman's head lolling against his shoulder. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a hallway that smelled like mildew and old cooking oil. He fumbled with his keys, finally got the door open and stepped inside. Mrs. Chen looked up from the couch where she'd been dozing, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Her eyes went wide. "Evan? What?" "Emergency," Evan said quickly. "Found her in the street. Storm. I'll explain later." Mrs. Chen rose, moving with surprising speed for a woman in her 70s. She looked the stranger over with sharp, assessing eyes. "She needs dry clothes and tea. I'll get towels." "Thank you." Evan carried the woman to the bathroom, set her gently on the closed toilet lid. She blinked up at him, more coherent now, but still lost. "Stay put," he told her. "I'll be right back." He ducked into his bedroom, barely more than a closet with a mattress on the floor, and grabbed the cleanest clothes he could find, a pair of sweatpants that would be too big for her and an old flannel shirt. When he returned, Mrs. Chen was already there with towels and a basin of warm water. "I'll help her," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You check on Liam." Evan nodded and backed out, pulling the door closed. He stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain away, feeling the full weight of what he'd just done settle on his shoulders. He'd brought a stranger into his home. A drunk stranger. What if she woke up angry? What if she accused him of something? What if... No, he couldn't think like that. He'd done the right thing. That was all that mattered. Liam's room was barely big enough for the twin bed and the small dresser Evan had salvaged from a curb. His son was curled on his side, clutching the stuffed bear Sarah had given him before she got sick. Evan brushed a hand over the boy's dark hair, so much like his mother's, and felt his throat tighten. "Daddy?" Liam's voice was sleep-soft and small. "Right here, buddy. Go back to sleep." Storm's loud. "I know, but we're safe. I'm here." Liam's eyes drifted shut again, and Evan stayed there for a long moment, watching his son breathe. This was why he walked through storms, why he worked jobs that ground him down to nothing. Because this boy was everything, and Evan would burn the world to keep him safe. When he came back out, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the kitchen, heating water in the kettle. The stranger, still unnamed, was on the couch now, wrapped in one of Evan's flannel shirts and a blanket Mrs. Chen must have brought from her apartment. Her hair was towel-dried and hung in damp waves around her face. She looked younger than Evan had first thought, mid-30s maybe, and there was something familiar about her features, though he couldn't place it. "She won't talk," Mrs. Chen said quietly, "but she drank some water. That's good. Thanks for staying." "Of course." Mrs. Chen patted his arm. You're a good man, Evan Cole. Your Sarah would be proud. The words hit harder than they should have. Evan just nodded. Mrs. Chen gathered her things and left, and Evan was alone with the stranger. He poured tea, cheap chamomile, the only kind he had, and brought it to the couch. The woman took the cup with both hands, staring into it like she was reading tea leaves. "Thank you," she said finally. Her voice was clearer now, though still rough. For what you did. Don't mention it. I could have died." "Yeah, you could have." She looked up at him then, really looked, and Evan saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just the dawning realization of where she was and what had happened. I don't usually do this. I'm not. It's okay. You don't have to explain. I'm not a bad person." "Didn't say you were." She took a sip of tea, winced at the heat. "What's your name?" "Evan. Evan Cole." "Evan." She repeated it slowly, like she was committing it to memory. She paused, and something shifted in her expression. "I'm no one." Evan didn't push. People had their reasons for staying anonymous, and he respected that. Instead, he settled into the armchair across from her, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His clothes were still wet, and he was starting to shiver himself, but he didn't want to leave her alone. Not yet. "You can sleep on the couch," he said. "I'll take the chair. In the morning, we'll figure out how to get you home." The woman nodded slowly. She set the tea aside and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Her eyes were already closing. "Evan?" "Yeah?" "You have a kind face." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Within minutes, she was asleep. Evan stayed awake longer, watching her breathe, making sure she didn't choke or stop breathing or do any of the terrible things drunk people sometimes did. The storm continued to rage outside, rattling the windows, but inside the apartment it was warm and quiet. Evan's eyes grew heavy. His shoulder ached. His mind replayed the moment in the street over and over. The truck's headlights, the woman's empty eyes, the split-second decision that had changed both their nights. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, gray morning light was filtering through the curtains, and the couch was empty. Evan sat up fast, his heart hammering. The blanket was folded neatly at one end. The teacup was rinsed and sitting in the sink. The borrowed clothes were draped over the back of a chair. But the woman was gone. She'd left no note, no name, no trace that she'd been there at all, except for the faint smell of expensive perfume that lingered in the air like a ghost. Evan stood in the center of his small living room, staring at the empty couch, and wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing. But then he looked down and saw his shirt, the one she'd worn, and noticed something in the pocket. He pulled it out. It was a business card. Cream-colored, expensive stock. Embossed lettering. Grace Harlow, Chief Executive Officer. Harlow Industries. Evan's blood went cold. Grace Harlow, the woman who owned the building where he worked, the woman whose name was on his paychecks, the woman he'd never seen in person because people like her didn't notice people like him. He'd saved his boss, and she disappeared into the morning like smoke. Evan sank onto the couch, the card trembling in his hand, and realized his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Evan stared at that business card for 3 full minutes before Liam's bedroom door creaked open. "Daddy?" His son patted out in his 2 small pajamas, the ones with the faded dinosaurs that Evan kept meaning to replace. "You're home." Evan shoved the card into his pocket and forced a smile. "Course I am, buddy. When am I not?" Liam climbed onto his lap, still warm with sleep, and Evan wrapped his arms around him, breathing in the scent of cheap shampoo and little boy. This was real. This mattered. Everything else, the storm, the woman, the impossible business card in his pocket, could wait. "Mrs. Chen said there was a storm lady," Liam said. "Mrs. Chen talks too much." "She said you saved her." "I helped someone who needed help, that's all." Liam pulled back to look at him with those serious brown eyes that were too old for 8. "Like a superhero?" "No, bud. Like a person. That's what people do." But even as he said it, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about last night had been ordinary. The next 3 days passed in a blur of routine that felt anything but. Evan went to work, walked the silent halls of Harlow Industries, and tried not to think about the fact that somewhere in this building, Grace Harlow was probably sitting in her corner office, maybe remembering the night she'd woken up in a stranger's apartment. Or maybe she'd been too drunk to remember anything at all. Maybe that business card had been left intentionally. Or maybe it had just fallen out of a pocket. He didn't know which possibility scared him more. His coworkers noticed something was off. Marcus, who worked the loading dock, asked if he was sick. "You look like you've seen a ghost, man." "Just tired," Evan said. "You're always tired. This is different." But Evan couldn't explain it, so he just shrugged and got back to work. On the fourth night, everything changed. His shift ended at midnight, same as always. The storm had passed days ago, leaving the city washed clean and crisp. Evan walked his usual route home, past the closed shops and empty lots, his breath fogging in the October air. He was thinking about the electric bill, still unpaid, and wondering if he could pick up an extra shift somewhere when he saw her. She was standing under a broken streetlight, the one that had been flickering for months. This time she wasn't drunk. This time she was perfectly still, dressed in dark jeans and a coat that probably cost more than Evan made in 3 months. Her hair was pulled back, and even from a distance he could see she was sober, alert, waiting for him. Evan's first instinct was to turn around, to pretend he hadn't seen her, to avoid whatever conversation was about to happen. But his feet kept moving forward, pulled by something he couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or just the bone-deep inability to walk away from someone who looked like they needed something, even if that someone was his boss. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was steady now, nothing like the slurred words from that night. "I was hoping you'd come this way." "Ms. Harlow." He stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance. "You shouldn't be out here. This neighborhood isn't safe at night." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Neither was that intersection, but you were there anyway. That was different." "How?" "I didn't have a choice." "Neither did I." She took a step closer, and Evan could see her more clearly now. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her hands were shoved deep in her coat pockets like she was holding something back. "I came to thank you, properly. You left your business card. That was enough." "No, it wasn't." She looked away toward the dark street, and when she spoke again her voice was quieter. "I've been trying to work up the courage to come talk to you for 3 days. I've stood on this corner every night, watching for you, and every night I've chickened out. Do you know how pathetic that is? A CEO afraid to thank the man who saved her life?" Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he waited. "I saw your apartment," Grace continued. "Not much, just glimpses while your neighbor was helping me. The photos on the wall, taped up because you don't have frames. The wooden toys on the shelf that someone carved by hand. The permission slip on the refrigerator for a field trip you probably can't afford to send your son on." She finally looked back at him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I saw a man who has nothing and still opened his door to a stranger. Anyone would have done the same." "No." Her voice was sharp now, almost angry. "They wouldn't. I've been testing that theory for 10 years, Mr. Cole. Trust me, they wouldn't." The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the dying streetlight. Evan shifted his weight, uncomfortable under her gaze. "I don't need thanks," he said finally. "You were in trouble. I helped. That's the end of it." "Is it?" Grace pulled one hand from her pocket, and Evan saw she was holding something. A photograph, creased and worn like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. She held it out to him. "Look at this." Evan took it reluctantly. The photo showed a woman, younger, lighter, the weight of the world not yet on her shoulders, with her arm around a small boy. He was maybe 7 or 8, with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile, holding up a toy dinosaur like it was the greatest treasure in the world. "My son," Grace said quietly. "Henry. That was taken 3 months before he died." Evan's chest tightened. He tried to hand the photo back, but Grace shook her head. "Car accident, 10 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light." Her voice was steady, reciting facts like a newsreader. Henry was in the back seat. He died instantly. The doctor said he didn't suffer, like that was supposed to make it better. Ms. Harlow, my husband left 6 months later. Couldn't stand to look at me, couldn't stand the empty house. I threw myself into work because work doesn't ask you how you're doing or tell you it's time to move on. Work doesn't care that there's a hole in your chest where your child used to be. She took the photo back, staring at it. And every year on the anniversary of his death, I get drunk enough to forget I'm still alive. Understanding crashed over Evan like a wave. That night was 10 years exactly. Grace tucked the photo away. I didn't plan to walk into traffic. I didn't plan anything. I just wanted the pain to stop, even if just for a few hours. And then she stopped, pressed her lips together. You didn't know me, didn't know my name, but you still ran into traffic to pull me out. I told you anyone would have. My son was 8 when he died, Grace interrupted. Your son is 8 now. I saw that permission slip. Liam, right? Going to the science museum? Evan's jaw tightened. Don't. Don't what? Don't use my son to make yourself feel better about that night. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but Grace didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded slowly. You're right. That was out of line. I'm sorry. She turned to leave, and Evan knew he should let her. Should let this entire strange situation end right here. Let them both go back to their separate lives. Her in her penthouse, him in his tiny apartment. But something made him speak. Wait, Grace stopped. Why are you really here? She turned back, and in the dim light, Evan could see the careful mask she wore cracking just slightly. Because you saw me at my worst, and I want you to know that's not all I am. Because I've spent 10 years being the woman who lost everything, and for just a moment in your apartment, surrounded by your dignity and your carved toys and your son's dinosaur books, I remembered what it felt like to be human again. She paused. And because I want to do something for you, not as charity, not as pity, but as redemption. I don't need redemption. I do. The words were raw, honest. Let me help you, Mr. Cole. Let me fund your education. Let me help your son. Not because you're pathetic or because I'm noble, but because for the first time in a decade, I saw something worth saving and it wasn't me. Evan took a step back. No. No? I'm not your redemption project. I'm not some feel-good story you can tell yourself to sleep better at night. My son and I, we're doing fine. Are you? Grace's voice was gentle but unyielding. You work night security for minimum wage. Your phone is disconnected, your son's wearing shoes with holes in them. That's not fine, Mr. Cole. That's survival. Survival is fine, Evan shot back. Survival is honest work and paying my own way and teaching my son that you don't take handouts from people who feel guilty. Is that what you think this is? Guilt? Isn't it? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind executives carried for jotting down ideas. She scribbled something, tore out the page, and held it out to him. That's my personal number, not the business line. Mine. She waited until Evan reluctantly took the paper. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm not even asking you to call me. But I am asking you to think about it. Think about what you could do with an education. Think about what your son's life could look like if you had the resources to give him what he deserves. And then, if you decide you want to talk, call me. And if I don't, then I'll respect that. But, Mr. Cole? She met his eyes. Pride is a luxury. I hope you can afford it. She walked away then, her footsteps echoing on the empty street until she reached a black sedan parked at the corner. The driver, Evan hadn't even noticed there was a driver, opened the door for her, and she slipped inside. The car pulled away, and Evan was left standing under the broken streetlight with a phone number in his hand and 1,000 thoughts in his head. He didn't call. For 5 days, that scrap of paper sat on his kitchen counter next to the coffee maker that only worked half the time and the stack of bills he couldn't pay. He looked at it every morning when he made Liam breakfast. He looked at it every night when he came home from work. But he didn't call. Pride was a luxury, Grace had said. But pride was also all he had left. On the 6th day, Liam came home from school crying. Evan was asleep. He'd worked a double shift and collapsed on the couch when the door slammed open and his son's sobs pulled him awake. He sat up fast, adrenaline spiking, and found Liam standing in the doorway with tears streaming down his face and his backpack hanging from one shoulder. "Buddy, what happened?" Evan was on his feet instantly, checking for injuries, looking for blood. "Are you hurt?" "They laughed at me," Liam choked out. "Everyone laughed." "Who? Why?" "I fell in PE. My shoe came apart and I fell and everyone saw and they all laughed." He held up his sneaker, the one with the hole Evan had been meaning to fix, and it was worse now. The sole completely detached, held on by a single strip of rubber. "Tommy said I'm poor. He said his mom said we live in the bad building where poor people live." Evan felt something crack inside his chest. He pulled Liam into his arms, holding him tight while his son cried into his shirt. "Tommy's an idiot. And his mom's an idiot too if she's teaching him to talk like that." "Are we poor, Daddy?" "We're managing." "That means yes." Evan couldn't argue with that. He held Liam for a long time, until the crying stopped and turned to hiccups. Then he made hot chocolate, the cheap instant kind, but Liam didn't care, and they sat together on the couch while Evan tried to figure out what to say. "You know what makes someone rich?" he asked finally. Liam shook his head. "Having people who love them. Having a safe place to sleep. Having enough food to eat, and a father who'd do anything to keep them safe. That's rich, buddy. Everything else is just noise. But I still need new shoes." "I know. I'll figure it out." But Liam's red-rimmed eyes said what his mouth didn't. "You always say that, and it never changes." After Liam went to bed that night, Evan stood at the kitchen counter, staring at that phone number. He thought about Tommy's cruel words. He thought about the hole in his son's shoe. He thought about the permission slip for the field trip that was due tomorrow, the one he couldn't afford to sign. He thought about pride and what it cost. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Grace Harlow, it's Evan Cole." His voice was rough. "I want to talk." There was a pause, and when Grace spoke again, he could hear the careful neutrality in her tone. "Okay. When?" "Tomorrow. After my shift." "Where?" "Your office. I'm not coming to your house, and I don't want you coming to mine again." "All right. I'll leave your name at the front desk. Midnight?" 12:30. "I need to walk home first, check on my son." "Bring him if you want." "No." The word came out sharper than Evan intended. "This is between us. He doesn't get pulled into this until I know what this is." "Fair enough." Grace paused. "Thank you for calling, Mr. Cole." "Don't thank me yet. I haven't agreed to anything." "I know, but you called. That's enough for now." Evan hung up without saying goodbye, his heart pounding like he'd just done something dangerous. Maybe he had. The next night, after tucking Liam in and confirming with Mrs. Chen that she'd check on him in an hour, Evan walked back to Harlow Industries. The building looked different at night when he was entering through the front door instead of the service entrance. The lobby was all marble and glass, cold and gleaming under recessed lighting. The security guard at the desk, James, who Evan knew from the break room, looked up in surprise. "Evan, what are you doing here?" "Meeting with Ms. Harlow." James's eyebrows shot up. "You're on the list. Penthouse level. She's expecting you." The elevator ride to the top floor was the longest 60 seconds of Evan's life. He caught his reflection in the mirrored walls, tired eyes, cheap jacket, work boots that had seen better years, and almost turned around. What was he doing here? What made him think someone like Grace Harlow actually wanted to help someone like him? But then he thought about Liam's face, the tears, the shame, and he stayed put. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway that was more museum than office. Original artwork on the walls. Soft lighting. Carpet so thick Evan's footsteps made no sound. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors stood open, and he could see Grace inside, sitting at a conference table with a pot of coffee and 2 cups. She stood when he entered. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming." "Don't," Evan said. "Don't what?" "Don't be formal. You've seen me carry you through a hurricane and you've stood in my kitchen. We're past Mr. Cole." Something in her expression softened. "Evan, then. And you can call me Grace." He nodded stiffly and sat across from her at the table. Grace poured coffee, real coffee, the kind that smelled rich and complex, and pushed a cup toward him. Evan wrapped his hands around it, needing something to do. "I'm going to be direct," Grace said, sitting back down, "because I think you'd appreciate that more than corporate speak." "Yeah, I would. I want to pay for you to go back to school. Business administration, project management, whatever you want to study. Night classes so you can keep working. I'll cover tuition, books, everything. In exchange, you'll work for me, not as security, but in operations. You'll start at the bottom of that department, but you'll start with a real salary, benefits, healthcare for you and Liam." Evan's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because you're smart. Because you're observant. Because anyone who can raise a child alone while working nights and still have the presence of mind to save a stranger's life has the kind of character this company needs. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." Grace leaned forward. "I had HR pull your file after that night. Do you know what I found? Perfect attendance for 3 years, not a single complaint. Twice you caught attempted break-ins that the police said prevented major thefts. You're overqualified for your position, Evan. You're wasted on night security. It's honest work. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying you deserve better. Your son deserves better." There it was. The hook she knew would get him. Evan's hands tightened on the coffee cup. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just boundaries." Grace pulled out a folder she'd clearly come prepared and slid it across the table. 3-month trial period. If at any point you're uncomfortable, you walk away. No questions, no penalties. If I overstep, you tell me. If anyone in this company gives you grief about favoritism, you come directly to me. And we keep this professional. I'm not trying to buy your friendship, Evan. I'm trying to give you an opportunity. Evan opened the folder. Inside was a contract, simple and clear, outlining exactly what Grace had described. The salary made his breath catch. It was more than triple what he made now. The benefits package included dental. When was the last time Liam had been to a dentist? "I'll look like a charity case," he said quietly. "To who? The people in this building don't know your story. All they'll know is that I hired someone from security into operations. It happens. And if anyone asks, you tell them you earned it." "Did I?" "You saved my life. I'd say that's earning it." Evan stared at the contract, his mind racing. He thought about Liam's shoes, about the unpaid bills, about the field trip permission slip he'd had to tell his son they couldn't afford, about the look in his son's eyes when Tommy called them poor. Pride was a luxury, and Evan was tired of pretending he could afford it. 3 months, he said, trial period. And if I feel like this is charity or pity or whatever psychological thing you need to work through, I'm out. Deal. Grace held out her hand. Evan shook it, her grip firm and cool. "When do I start?" 2 weeks. That gives you time to finish out your security contract and prepare Liam. I'll have HR contact you about paperwork. She paused. "There's one more thing." Of course there was. Evan waited. Grace pulled out another paper, this one with a list of names. "I'm starting a scholarship fund for single parents who want to go back to school. I need someone to help design it, someone who understands what those parents actually need, not what some board of directors thinks they need. I want you to help me build it. I'm not a charity expert." "No, you're someone who's lived it. That's worth more than any expert." Grace's eyes were steady on his. "Help me do this right, Evan. Help me make sure this fund actually helps people instead of just making me feel better." And despite himself, despite every instinct telling him to be careful, Evan felt something shift. Maybe this wasn't just about Grace's redemption. Maybe it was about his too. "Okay," he said. "I'll help." Grace smiled, a real smile, the first one he'd seen from her. And for just a moment she looked like the woman in that photograph with her son, before the world had taken everything from her. "Thank you," she said. Evan just nodded and stood to leave. He was at the door when Grace spoke again. "Evan?" He turned. "Your son, Liam, the field trip, the science museum?" Evan's spine stiffened. "What about it?" "I'll make sure the school's scholarship fund covers it. Anonymous donation. No one will know it came from me." It's not for you," Grace said quietly. "It's for him. Let him go on the field trip, Evan. Let him be 8 years old without worrying about money. Just this once. Evan wanted to argue, wanted to throw the offer back in her face and storm out with his pride intact. But then he thought about Liam's face when he'd asked if they were poor, and the word that came out wasn't the one he'd planned. Okay. He left before she could see how much that single word had cost him, walked through the marble lobby and out into the cold night air. The city stretched around him, vast and indifferent, full of people in their warm homes with their paid bills and their children's intact shoes. But for the first time in 3 years since Sarah had died and left him alone with a 5-year-old and a mountain of medical debt, Evan felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. It was terrifying. The hope lasted exactly 4 days before it curdled into doubt. Evan stood outside Mrs. Chen's apartment on a Thursday evening, his hand raised to knock, trying to find the words to explain why everything was about to change. How did you tell your 8-year-old son that the man who'd barely kept them afloat was suddenly being handed a life preserver by a woman they didn't know? How did you make it sound like opportunity instead of charity? He knocked. Mrs. Chen opened the door with Liam at her hip, the boy's face smeared with what looked like chocolate. Evan? Early tonight? Need to talk to Liam. You got a minute? Of course. Come in. Her apartment smelled like jasmine tea and the dumplings she made every Sunday. Liam scrambled down and ran to him, arms wide. Daddy, Mrs. Chen made cookies. I can see that. Evan wiped chocolate from his son's chin. Hey, bud. Can we talk for a second? Liam's smile faltered. In his short life, he'd learned that serious talks usually meant bad news. Did I do something wrong? No, nothing like that. I just need to tell you about something that's going to be different. Mrs. Chen tactfully retreated to her kitchen, but Evan could feel her listening. He sat on the worn couch and pulled Liam onto his lap, suddenly unsure where to begin. You know how I work at the big building downtown? He started. Liam nodded. Well, the woman who owns that building, her name is Ms. Harlow, she offered me a new job. A better one. It means I'll still work nights for a little while, but I'll also be going to school during the day to learn new things. And eventually I'll have a different schedule, better pay, we'll be able to move somewhere nicer. Liam's eyes went wide. Really? Really? Can we get a place with a park? Evan's throat tightened. Maybe. We'll see. And can I get new shoes? Yeah, buddy, new shoes, whatever you need. Liam threw his arms around Evan's neck, squeezing tight. This is the best day ever. But as Evan held his son, he felt Mrs. Chen's eyes on him from the kitchen doorway. When Liam finally pulled away and ran off to tell her about the park they might have, the old woman came and sat beside Evan. This woman, she said quietly, the one offering you this job. Is it the storm lady? Evan shouldn't have been surprised. Mrs. Chen missed nothing. Yeah. And you trust her? I don't know yet. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap. My son, the one I told you about who died young, he was proud. Too proud. When his business failed, people offered help. Good people, with no strings. But he couldn't accept it. Pride, he said. By the time he finally asked for help, it was too late. She looked at Evan. Pride won't feed your boy, Evan Cole. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do. The words sat heavy in his chest long after he'd taken Liam home, long after he'd tucked him into bed with promises of new shoes and parks and better days. Evan lay awake on his mattress on the floor, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and wondered if he was being brave or just desperate. His first day at Harlow Industries in operations started at 7 in the morning, which meant leaving Liam with Mrs. Chen earlier than usual. The boy was still half asleep when Evan kissed his forehead goodbye, but he mumbled, "Good luck, Daddy," and that was enough to carry Evan through the lobby doors. The operations department was on the 8th floor, a maze of cubicles and conference rooms that hummed with purposeful energy. People in business casual hurried past with coffee cups and manila folders, speaking a language of acronyms and metrics that Evan didn't understand. He stood in the doorway feeling like an imposter until a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes approached him. Evan Cole? Yes, ma'am. Janet Reeves. I run this department. Ms. Harlow tells me you're joining us. She looked him up and down, taking in his department store slacks and borrowed tie. You've got security experience. That's good. We need someone who pays attention to details. But let me be clear, I don't care who brought you here. In my department, you earn your place. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Good. Your desk is in the back. Marcus will show you the systems. She turned to leave, then paused. And Cole? Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel old. Janet's fine. Marcus turned out to be a kid barely out of college with enthusiasm that bordered on exhausting. He spent the morning walking Evan through inventory management software, shipping protocols, and vendor relations. Evan's head spun with information, but he took notes in a spiral notebook and asked questions when he didn't understand, and slowly the chaos started to form patterns. At lunch, he sat alone in the break room with the sandwich he'd packed the night before. The other employees gave him curious glances but kept their distance. Evan was used to being invisible, but this was different. They saw him. They just didn't know what to make of him yet. You're the new guy. A woman slid into the chair across from him, her badge identifying her as Sandra Kim, Senior Operations Manager. Security transfer, right? That's right. Interesting career path. She unwrapped her own lunch, eyeing him carefully. Ms. Harlow doesn't usually pull people up from security. What makes you special? There it was, the question he'd been dreading. Evan kept his voice neutral. I was in the right place at the right time. Must have been some right place. Sandra took a bite of her salad. Word around the office is she personally recruited you. That true? I don't know what word around the office says. Fair enough? She studied him for another moment, then shrugged. Well, if you can handle Janet's standards, you'll do fine. She doesn't care where you came from, just whether you can do the work. After Sandra left, Evan sat alone with his half-eaten sandwich, wondering how long it would take before the whispers started, before someone dug deeper and found out he'd carried their CEO home drunk in a storm, before the story spread and he became the charity case everyone pitied. He was saved from his thoughts by his phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. How's the first day? Grace. Evan stared at it, then typed back. Fine. Busy. Good. Don't forget, night classes start next week. Enrollment packet is with HR. He'd almost forgotten about school. The idea of juggling work and classes while still taking care of Liam seemed impossible. But Evan had built a life out of impossible things. He texted back a simple okay and finished his lunch. The afternoon was a blur of learning vendor codes and shipping schedules. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, Evan's brain felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. He gathered his things and headed for the elevator, only to find Grace waiting by the doors. Walk with me? She asked. It wasn't really a request. Evan nodded and followed her into the elevator. They rode down in silence until they reached the parking garage, where her black sedan waited. Grace leaned against it, arms crossed. Janet says you did well today. She called you already? I asked her to check in, not because I don't trust you, but because I wanted to make sure the transition was smooth. Grace paused. Was it? Evan thought about Sandra's questions, about the curious stares, about the weight of being watched. It was fine. You're a terrible liar. I'm not lying. It was fine. People are curious. I expected that. They're going to ask questions. Let them. Evan met her eyes. I told you I'd do this for 3 months. I didn't say I'd do it easy. A small smile tugged at Grace's lips. Fair enough. But Evan, if it gets too much, if the scrutiny or the pressure or any of it becomes unbearable, you tell me. That's part of the deal. The deal was 3 months. I'll make it 3 months. Stubborn. You knew that when you hired me. Grace laughed, a real laugh that softened the edges of her carefully maintained composure. I did. God help me. I did. She pushed off the car. Go home to your son, Evan. First day's over. Tomorrow will be easier. But tomorrow wasn't easier. It was harder. Evan arrived to find his desk piled with shipping manifests that didn't match inventory records, and Janet's clipped voice over the intercom asking him to figure out where 3 pallets of product had gone missing. He spent 6 hours cross-referencing purchase orders and warehouse logs, his eyes burning from the computer screen, until he finally found the discrepancy. A vendor had delivered to the wrong facility 3 states over. Good work, Janet said when he brought her the report. Most people would have missed that. I'm used to paying attention to what doesn't fit. Security training? Life training, Janet nodded slowly. Well, keep it up. We've got a meeting with the executive team next week about warehouse efficiency. I want you there. Evan blinked. Me? You found the problem. You can explain it better than I can. Besides, you need to learn how these meetings work if you're going to move up. Moving up. The concept was so foreign that Evan almost laughed. He'd spent 3 years moving sideways at best, just trying to stay afloat. The idea that there was an up to move toward felt like a trick. Night classes started the following Monday. Evan spent his days at Harlow Industries and his evenings at the community college, learning business fundamentals from professors who didn't care where he came from or how he'd gotten there. The other students were mostly younger, fresh-faced kids who talked about internships and career paths like they were guaranteed. Evan kept to himself, took his notes, and went home to check on Liam. By the end of week 3, he was exhausted. By the end of week 5, he was running on fumes. And by the end of week 7, something had to give. It happened during the executive meeting Janet had mentioned. Evan sat in the conference room surrounded by department heads in expensive suits, his own borrowed blazer feeling like a costume. He presented his findings on the missing inventory clearly and concisely, just as Janet had coached him, but as he finished, a man at the far end of the table leaned forward. Evan Cole, right? The man's badge identified him as Richard Sterling, VP of Supply Chain. You transferred from security? That's correct. Interesting. Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. And how long have you been working in operations? 2 months? 7 weeks, Tim. 7 weeks. And you're here presenting to the executive team. Must be nice to have friends in high places. The room went quiet. Evan felt every eye turn toward him, waiting to see how he'd respond. Janet started to speak, but Evan cut her off. I'm here because I found a problem that cost this company $60,000 in misrouted inventory. I'm here because I did my job well enough to earn it. Who my friends are doesn't change that. Doesn't it? Sterling leaned back. Word is Ms. Harlow personally recruited you, that she's funding your education. Seems like a lot of special treatment for a former night security guard. Evan's hands clenched under the table, but he kept his voice level. You're right, it is special treatment. Ms. Harlow saw potential in someone who most people wouldn't look twice at, and she gave me a chance to prove myself. So far, I've proven I can do the work. If that bothers you, Mr. Sterling, I suggest you take it up with Ms. Harlow. But my results speak for themselves. Sterling's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a voice cut through the tension. They certainly do. Everyone turned. Grace stood in the doorway, dressed in a sharp gray suit, her expression neutral but her eyes blazing. Evan, excellent presentation. Your analysis saved us significant revenue. Janet, I want a full audit of our vendor routing systems based on his findings. She turned to Sterling. Richard, my office. Now. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. As people filed out, Janet caught Evan's arm. You handled that well. Did I? I probably just made an enemy. Sterling's been an enemy since before you got here. Don't worry about him. She paused. But watch your back. Office politics can be uglier than anything you saw in security. Evan nodded and gathered his things, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. He was halfway to the elevator when Grace caught up to him. My office, please. They rode up to the penthouse in silence. Once inside, Grace closed the door and turned to him, arms crossed. Are you okay? I'm fine. That was a setup. Sterling's been pushing back on my hiring decisions for months. He used you to take a shot at me. I figured. Evan set his folder down. What did you say to him? That's between me and Richard, but he won't be a problem anymore. Grace? No. Her voice was firm. I told you if anyone gave you grief about favoritism, you come to me. You did your part. Let me do mine. Evan wanted to argue, but the exhaustion of 7 weeks of juggling too many things finally caught up with him. He sank into a chair, rubbing his face. I knew this would happen. People were always going to see me as the charity case. Then prove them wrong. Grace sat across from him. You're doing excellent work, Evan. Janet told me you've cut processing errors by 15% in your section. The warehouse audit you suggested is going to save us hundreds of thousands. That's not charity. That's earned. It doesn't feel earned when I have to justify my existence in every meeting. Welcome to corporate America. You think I don't have to justify myself every day? I'm a woman CEO in a male-dominated industry. Half the board still questions every decision I make. The difference is, I stopped caring what they think and started focusing on results. She leaned forward. You're good at this, Evan. Better than you give yourself credit for. Don't let people like Sterling make you doubt that. Evan looked at her. This woman who'd been a broken stranger in a storm and was now somehow a mentor, an ally, maybe even a friend, and felt something shift. Maybe she was right. Maybe results were all that mattered. Okay, he said quietly. I'll focus on the work. Good. Grace stood. Now go home. It's Friday night. Spend time with Liam. The office can survive without you for a weekend. But the office couldn't survive what came next. Evan was halfway through week 9 when the scandal broke. He arrived Monday morning to find the building in chaos, security guards at every entrance, IT specialists swarming the 8th floor, executives huddled in urgent meetings behind closed doors. Janet pulled him aside as soon as he stepped off the elevator. We've got a major problem. Someone's been leaking proprietary data to our competitors. Shipping routes, vendor contracts, pricing structures, everything. It's been going on for months. Evan's security instincts kicked in immediately. Do we know who? Not yet, but 8 traced the leak to someone with high-level access. They're investigating now. Janet's face was grim. If we don't find the source, we could lose major contracts. This could sink the company. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Evan watched people he'd worked alongside for weeks eye each other with suspicion. Passwords were changed. Access was restricted. The entire building felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. On Thursday, Evan stayed late, going through old shipping manifests for a project Janet had assigned. Everyone else had gone home, and the floor was quiet. He was about to pack up when something caught his eye, a pattern in the data he'd seen before, during his first week. Back then, he'd dismissed it as a clerical error, but now, looking at months of records spread across his screen, he saw it clearly. Someone had been systematically rerouting small portions of shipments, just enough to avoid immediate detection. The routes all led back to the same secondary vendor, a company Evan had never heard of. He cross-referenced the approvals and felt his blood run cold. Every single one was signed off by Richard Sterling. Evan sat back, his mind racing. This was bigger than he'd thought. Sterling wasn't just leaking data, he was actively sabotaging operations, likely for profit. The question was why, and how to prove it. He spent the next 2 hours building a comprehensive report, documenting every suspicious transaction, every unusual approval, every piece of evidence that pointed to Sterling. By the time he finished, it was nearly midnight. His hands were shaking as he printed the report and put it in a sealed envelope. He took it directly to Grace's office. The lights were still on, which didn't surprise him. Grace worked late most nights, as though staying busy could keep the ghosts at bay. Evan knocked, and her voice called out, "Come in?" She looked up from her laptop, surprise crossing her face. "Evan, what are you doing here? It's midnight." "I found something." He set the envelope on her desk. "About the data leak." Grace's expression sharpened. She opened the envelope and began reading. Evan watched her face shift from curiosity to shock to cold, controlled anger. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hard. "You're sure about this?" "I've triple-checked everything. The pattern's there. Sterling's been routing inventory through a shell company, probably one he owns or has a stake in. He's been selling our proprietary data to competitors and skimming profit from misrouted shipments. I'd estimate he's stolen close to $2 million over the last 18 months. Grace was quiet for a long moment, then she picked up her phone. "I need you to come in. Now. I don't care what time it is. Get here." She hung up and looked at Evan. "That was our head of security and our legal team. This stays between us until they verify everything. But Evan, if you're right about this, you just saved this company." "I did my job." "No, you did more than that. You saw something everyone else missed because you actually paid attention." She stood and came around the desk. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still have to prove it." The next 72 hours were a blur. Security and legal tore through Sterling's records, finding exactly what Evan had documented and more. By Monday morning, Richard Sterling was escorted from the building by police, charged with corporate espionage and embezzlement. The news spread through Harlow Industries like wildfire. Evan kept his head down, trying to avoid the spotlight, but it was impossible. People who'd ignored him for weeks suddenly wanted to know his story. Sandra Kim cornered him in the break room with genuine respect in her eyes. "You're the one who caught Sterling? The guy everyone said was just here because of favoritism?" "I just did my job," Evan repeated for the 100th time. "Some job." She shook her head. "I owe you an apology. I thought you were getting special treatment. Turns out you earned every bit of it." By the time week 12 rolled around, the end of his 3-month trial, Evan had become something he'd never expected: respected. Janet offered him a permanent position with a promotion. His coworkers invited him to lunch. The whispers changed from suspicion to admiration. And through it all, Grace kept her distance, letting his accomplishments speak for themselves. On the last day of his trial period, she called him to her office. Evan went with a mixture of anticipation and dread, unsure what came next. Grace gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." He sat. "3 months ago, I made you an offer. 3 months to decide if this arrangement worked for both of us." She paused. "Has it worked for you?" Evan thought about Liam's new shoes, the apartment with working heat, the fact that his son had gone on that field trip and come home talking about dinosaurs for 3 straight days. He thought about going to school, about learning things he'd never imagined he'd understand, about feeling like maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than survival. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's worked." "Good, because it's worked for me too. You're one of the best hires I've made in years, Evan. Not because I gave you a chance, but because you took it and ran with it." She slid a folder across the desk. "This is a permanent offer. Salary increase, better benefits, and a new title, Operations Analyst. Janet wants you on her senior team." Evan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the numbers. The salary was more than he'd ever imagined making. The benefits included not just healthcare, but vision and dental, and even a retirement plan. It was real. It was happening. "There's one more thing," Grace said. "The scholarship fund we talked about, for single parents going back to school. We're launching it next month. I want you to be on the board. Help me make sure it actually helps people who need it." Evan looked up at her. "Why me?" "Because you know what it's like. Because you'll fight for them the way you fought for yourself. Because this isn't just about redemption for me anymore, Evan. It's about building something that matters." She paused. "What do you say?" Evan thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, exhausted, barely keeping his head above water, one emergency away from losing everything. He thought about the man he was now, still exhausted, still fighting, but fighting towards something instead of just against the tide. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." Grace smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Good. Now get out of here. It's Friday night. Take your son somewhere fun. You've earned it." Evan stood to leave, but at the door he turned back. "Grace?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For seeing something in me I didn't see in myself. Thank you for proving me right." He left before the emotion in his chest could turn into words, took the elevator down, and stepped out into the evening air. The city stretched around him, still vast and indifferent, but somehow less overwhelming than it had been 3 months ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Daddy, are you coming home soon? Mrs. Chen made extra dumplings." Evan smiled and typed back, "On my way, buddy. Save me some." As he walked through streets that had once felt like enemy territory, Evan realized that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped just surviving. He was living again. And the woman who'd stumbled drunk into traffic had somehow taught him how. The dumplings were still warm when Evan got home, and Liam's face was smeared with soy sauce. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself. The table was covered with steamed buns, stir-fried vegetables, and enough food to feed a small army. She beamed at Evan from the kitchen doorway, her weathered face creased with pride. "Big day deserves big meal," she announced. "Sit, sit, eat while hot." Evan wanted to ask how she knew it was a big day, but Mrs. Chen had a way of knowing things before they were spoken. He sat beside Liam, who immediately launched into a breathless story about a science experiment at school involving vinegar and baking soda that had apparently exploded all over his teacher's desk. And then Mr. Rodriguez said it was okay because that's what science is, making mistakes and learning from them, Liam finished, his eyes bright. Can we do experiments at home? Maybe small ones, Evan said, ruffling his son's hair, ones that don't explode. But explosions are the best part. Mrs. Chen laughed from across the table, and for a moment everything felt impossibly normal. The small kitchen, the simple meal, this boy who talked too fast and smiled too wide. This was what mattered, not the title on a business card or the numbers in a bank account, just this. But as Liam chattered on about rockets and chemical reactions, Evan's phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Board meeting Tuesday, 9 a.m. Need you there to present scholarship fund proposal. No pressure. The last two words made him smile. Everything with Grace came with pressure, even when she pretended otherwise. He texted back, I'll be ready. The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost foreign. Evan took Liam to the park, a real park with working swings and grass that wasn't mostly dirt, and watched his son race around with an energy that seemed limitless. They got ice cream from a truck, the expensive kind with real vanilla beans, and Liam declared it the best ice cream in the entire universe. Can we do this every weekend? Liam asked as they walked home, his hand sticky in Evan's. Maybe not every weekend, but more often than before. Because you have a good job now? Because we're doing better, yeah. Liam was quiet for a moment, then, Daddy, is Ms. Harlow your friend? The question caught Evan off guard. Why do you ask? Mrs. Chen said she's the storm lady, the one you saved, and she said Ms. Harlow is helping us because you helped her. Liam looked up at him with those two serious eyes. Is that true? Evan had known this conversation was coming, but he still wasn't prepared for it. He stopped walking and crouched down to Liam's eye level. Ms. Harlow is someone who gave me a chance when a lot of people wouldn't have. And yeah, I helped her once. But what we have now, it's not just about that night. It's about both of us trying to be better than we were. So she is your friend? Yeah, buddy, I think she is. Liam nodded, satisfied with this answer in the way 8-year-olds could be satisfied with simplicity. Good, I want to meet her sometime. Maybe you will. But even as he said it, Evan wasn't sure. He and Grace had maintained careful boundaries since that first night. Professional respect wrapped in mutual understanding, but always with distance. She'd never asked to meet Liam, and Evan had never offered. Some walls were easier to keep standing than to tear down. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Evan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie he still wasn't comfortable wearing, and tried to calm the nerves jumping in his stomach. He'd faced down Sterling in a room full of executives, had presented his findings with confidence, but somehow this felt different. This scholarship fund was personal. It represented every single parent who'd ever had to choose between paying rent and buying their kid new shoes, every person who'd been told they weren't worth the investment. He couldn't screw this up. The boardroom was on the top floor, a space designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its massive table that could seat 20. Evan had been in plenty of rooms in his life, but never one that cost more than his entire childhood home. Grace was already there, along with 6 board members whose combined wealth probably exceeded the GDP of a small country. They looked up as he entered, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Evan Cole, Grace said, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority she used in official settings. Our operations analyst and the architect of our single-parent education initiative. Evan, please present your proposal. He'd rehearsed this 100 times, but standing in front of these people who probably thought Charity was writing a check and forgetting about it, the words felt insufficient. Still, he opened his folder and began. The single-parent education initiative isn't about handouts, he started, meeting each board member's eyes. It's about removing barriers. A single parent who wants to go back to school faces obstacles most people never consider. Childcare during class hours, transportation, the cost of books and supplies on top of tuition. They can't just quit their job to be a full-time student. They're supporting a family. He pulled up the presentation he'd spent weeks preparing, charts and graphs showing the correlation between education and earning potential, the long-term economic benefits of investing in workforce development. But then he set aside his notes and spoke from experience. 3 months ago, I was working night security for minimum wage. I had a son to feed and bills I couldn't pay. When Ms. Harlow offered me a chance to go back to school, it wasn't just the tuition that mattered. It was the flexibility to keep working, the childcare support, the understanding that I couldn't just drop everything to be a student. That's what this initiative provides. Not just money, but actual practical support for people who are trying to build better lives. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair and a sharp suit, leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, this is a substantial investment. What's the return?" "Employees who are loyal because you invested in them. Workers with real-world experience and education. People who will remember that this company saw potential in them when no one else did." Evan paused. "You want a return on investment? It's measured in lives changed, in kids who see their parents graduate, in communities that get stronger because people have opportunities. If you're looking for a profit margin, this isn't for you. But if you want to build something that matters, this is how you do it." The room was silent. Evan couldn't tell if he'd made his case or just alienated every person at the table. Then the silver-haired man smiled. "Ms. Harlow, you were right about him. He's got fire." He looked at Evan. "You've got my vote. Let's make this happen." One by one, the other board members nodded their approval. Grace caught Evan's eye across the table, and her expression said what words couldn't. "Well done." The meeting wrapped up with logistics, funding amounts, application processes, oversight committees. Evan contributed where he could, but mostly he just tried to process that it was actually happening. They were going to help people with real struggles, people like him. When the board members finally filed out, Grace lingered. "That was quite a speech. I just told them the truth." Sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. She gathered her papers. "The first applications will open next month. We're expecting over 300 people to apply. I'll need you to help review them. You'll know who really needs this versus who's just looking for free money." "Grace, I'm not qualified to— You're the most qualified person in this building." Her voice was firm. "You've lived it. That's worth more than any HR degree." Evan wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Besides, he'd learned over the past 3 months that sometimes the best thing you could do was trust that people saw something in you that you couldn't see yourself. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." The scholarship fund launched on a Wednesday in late November with a press release that made the local news. Evan watched from his desk as reporters interviewed Grace, as she spoke eloquently about second chances and investing in people, but she never mentioned him by name. He appreciated that. This wasn't about him being a feel-good story. It was about the program being real and sustainable. Applications flooded in immediately. Single mothers working 3 jobs to support their kids, single fathers trying to transition out of dead-end careers, people who'd been knocked down by life and were desperately reaching for a handhold to pull themselves back up. Evan read every application personally, even though it meant staying late most nights. Each story hit him differently. The woman whose husband had left her with 2 kids and no degree, the man who'd been laid off at 50 and was trying to retrain for a new field, the young parent who'd aged out of foster care and was fighting to build a life. He couldn't save them all. The fund had limits, but he could save some, and that had to be enough. Janet found him at his desk one evening well past closing time, surrounded by application folders. "You're going to burn yourself out." "There's so many of them," Evan said quietly. "So many people who just need a chance." "So you give chances to as many as you can, and you make sure the program runs well enough that it's still here next year to help more." Janet sat on the edge of his desk. "You're doing good work, Evan, but you can't carry all of it yourself." "I know, He stopped, unsure how to articulate the weight of knowing what these applications represented. "When I read these, I see me 6 months ago. I see Liam. I see everyone I've ever known who was told they didn't matter. And now you get to tell them they do. But Evan, you matter too. Don't forget that while you're saving everyone else." After Janet left, Evan sat in the quiet office and let her words sink in. When had he started to believe he mattered? Not as a father or a worker or someone useful, but just as a person worthy of space in the world. Maybe it was the day Grace had shown up under that streetlight, sober and determined. Maybe it was when he'd stood in front of the board and spoke his truth. Or maybe it was happening gradually, one small moment at a time. Thanksgiving arrived with an invitation that surprised him. Grace called his desk directly, her voice uncertain in a way he'd rarely heard. "I know this might be overstepping," she started, "but I'm having a small dinner on Thursday. Very small. Just a few people from the office who don't have family nearby. Janet will be there, and Marcus from IT, and a couple others. I thought maybe you and Liam might want to come." Evan's first instinct was to decline. Thanksgiving was for family, and while he and Grace had become friends of a sort, there were still boundaries. But then he thought about Liam, who'd been asking about Ms. Harlow for weeks, and about the fact that their usual Thanksgiving was him and his son eating pizza while Mrs. Chen visited her nephew across town. "What time?" he asked. 2:00. "And Evan, it's casual, no pressure." "No, just food, and people being grateful. They're not alone." Thanksgiving Day was unseasonably warm, one of those autumn afternoons where the sun felt like a gift. Evan dressed Liam in his good shirt and spent 20 minutes arguing about whether the boy needed to wear shoes that weren't sneakers. "But these are my favorite shoes," Liam protested. "We're going to a nice dinner." Ms. Harlow said casual. In the end, Liam won, mostly because Evan was too nervous to fight about footwear. They took a cab to Grace's address, a high-rise in the part of the city where doormen wore uniforms and lobbies had actual art. The doorman checked a list and waved them through to an elevator that opened directly into Grace's penthouse. Evan had expected opulence, the kind of sterile wealth that felt more like a museum than a home. Instead, Grace's apartment was warm. Comfortable furniture, bookshelves overflowing with worn paperbacks, photos on the walls of a life that had been full before it had been emptied. And in one corner, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, a small shelf with toy dinosaurs and children's books that looked like they'd been read 1,000 times. Grace appeared from the kitchen wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, looking more relaxed than Evan had ever seen her. "You made it, and you must be Liam." Liam, usually shy around strangers, stepped forward and held out his hand with the formal politeness Evan had taught him. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Harlow. My dad says you're his friend." Grace shook his hand seriously. "I am, and please, call me Grace. Ms. Harlow makes me sound old." "How old are you?" "Liam," Evan said sharply, but Grace laughed. "It's fine. I'm 37. How old are you?" 8 3/4. The quarters are important." They absolutely are. Other guests arrived. Janet with a homemade pie, Marcus with a case of wine, 2 women from accounting whom Evan recognized but didn't know well. The apartment filled with conversation and laughter, the kind of easy gathering that happened when people stopped trying to impress each other and just existed together. Liam gravitated toward the toy shelf, and Grace surprised Evan by sitting on the floor beside his son, talking about dinosaurs with genuine interest. "That's a Triceratops," Liam explained, holding up a small figure. "They lived in the late Cretaceous period and ate plants. They're my favorite." "Mine too," Grace said. "See that book there? The one about prehistoric creatures? That was my son's favorite. He used to make me read it every night." Liam's eyes went wide. "You have a son?" "I did. He died a long time ago, but I kept his books, and sometimes I still read them." "That's sad." "It is. But it's also good to remember the happy parts. He really loved dinosaurs, just like you." Liam considered this with the seriousness of a child processing grief they didn't fully understand. Then he carefully selected a book from the shelf and brought it to Grace. "We could read this one together, if you want." Evan watched from across the room as Grace's composure cracked just slightly, her eyes bright with tears she didn't let fall. "I'd like that very much." They sat together on the floor, Grace reading and Liam asking a million questions, and Evan felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't charity anymore. This wasn't obligation or guilt or any of the complicated emotions that had started this journey. This was just connection, 2 broken people and a child building something new from the pieces of what they'd lost. Dinner was chaos in the best way. The table was too small for everyone, so they ate buffet style, balancing plates on laps and sharing stories. Janet told embarrassing tales about her early days at Harlow Industries. Marcus described a coding disaster that had nearly crashed the entire system. Grace shared a story about her first board meeting where she'd accidentally called one of the directors by the wrong name for the entire hour. "And he never corrected me," she said, laughing. Just answered to David, even though his name was Robert. Why didn't he say something? Liam asked. Because sometimes people are too polite to correct you, and you don't realize your mistake until it's too late. Grace met Evan's eyes across the room. But the important thing is that you keep showing up and trying to do better. The afternoon stretched into evening. Liam eventually fell asleep on Grace's couch, exhausted from excitement and too much pie. The other guests gradually left until it was just Evan and Grace, sitting by the windows watching the city lights flicker on. "Thank you for coming," Grace said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either, but I'm glad we did. Liam's a special kid." "He is. He's the best thing I ever did." Evan paused. "You were good with him, the dinosaur thing. That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't, but it was also—" She stopped, searching for words. "It was nice. To remember Henry as a person who loved things, not just as a loss. Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it does." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grace said, "I've been thinking about something, about how we met and how we got here and what it all means." And I think maybe we both needed saving that night. You pulled me out of traffic, but Evan, you've pulled me out of something bigger than that. You've reminded me that life can be about more than just surviving, that it's possible to build something good from something broken. Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Grace continued, "I want to expand the scholarship fund, make it national. We've helped 10 people this quarter, but there are thousands more who need it. I want to build partnerships with other companies, create a network of support that goes beyond just Harlow Industries." She looked at him, "And I want you to help me do it. Not as an employee, as a partner, co-director of the program." "Grace, I'm not qualified, experienced enough. I've heard all your objections before, and they're still wrong." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You know what these people need because you were one of them. That's the only qualification that matters. Say yes." Evan looked at his son sleeping on the couch, at this woman who'd gone from a drunk stranger to a friend, at the city sprawling below them, full of people fighting their own battles. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago and the man he was becoming. "Okay," he said. "Yes." Grace's smile was radiant. "Good. We start after the new year. But tonight, we celebrate what we've already built." She poured them each a small glass of wine, and they toasted to second chances and new beginnings, and the strange, beautiful ways that lives could intersect and change each other. When Evan finally woke Liam and called a cab home, the boy was drowsy but happy. As they rode through the city streets, Liam leaned against his father and mumbled, "I like Grace. She's nice." "Yeah, buddy, she is. And she's not sad anymore, not like she was at first." Evan blinked. "What do you mean, at first?" "When we got there, she had sad eyes, like she was pretending to be happy but wasn't really. But then after we read the dinosaur book, her eyes got different." Liam yawned. "Mrs. Chen says you can see someone's real feelings in their eyes. I think she's right." Out of the mouths of babes. Evan kissed the top of his son's head and held him close, grateful for this boy who saw the world with such clarity. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Evan's role expanded beyond operations into program development. He spent his days reviewing applications, coordinating with partner companies, and helping design support systems that actually worked for the people who needed them. Grace threw herself into fundraising, leveraging her connections and her story, carefully edited to remove the parts about drunk driving and storms, to build support for the initiative. By March, they'd helped 35 people go back to school. By June, that number doubled. Each success felt personal. The single mom who completed her nursing degree, the dad who retrained as an electrician, the young parent who was now on track to become a teacher. These weren't statistics. They were people whose lives had been fundamentally changed because someone had invested in them. Janet got promoted to VP of Operations and insisted Evan take over her old position. He protested that he wasn't ready, but she just laughed and told him he'd been ready since the day he'd exposed Sterling. Marcus moved to a senior developer role. Sandra Kim became his mentor, teaching him the political navigation required at the director level. Through it all, Grace was there. Not hovering, not micromanaging, but present. She started joining him and Liam for dinner once a month, usually at a diner Liam loved that served pancakes the size of his head. She came to Liam's school play, where he played a tree with exactly 2 lines and delivered them with Oscar-worthy conviction. She became Aunt Grace, the title given by Liam and accepted by Grace with visible emotion. In August, Evan moved into a real apartment, 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, windows that didn't rattle in storms. Liam got his own room for the first time in his life, and he decorated it with glow-in-the-dark stars and dinosaur posters. Mrs. Chen came for dinner once a week, beaming with pride at what Evan had built. "Your Sarah would be so proud," she told him one evening, her hand warm on his arm. "I hope so," Evan said quietly. "She would. And she would be glad you found Grace. Not to replace her, but to remind you that your life didn't end when hers did." It was true. Somewhere along the way, Evan had stopped just existing and started living again. He laughed more. He dreamed about the future instead of just surviving the present. He'd built a life that felt like it had purpose beyond mere endurance. The anniversary of the storm came on a Tuesday. Evan almost didn't notice. He was busy with a presentation for a potential partner company until Grace appeared at his office door with 2 cups of coffee. "Walk with me?" she asked. They took the elevator down and walked through the city toward that intersection where everything had changed. The broken streetlight had been fixed months ago. The median where Evan had tackled Grace was just a median now, unremarkable and ordinary. But standing there, both of them remembered. "1 year," Grace said quietly, "1 year since you ran into traffic to save someone you didn't know." "Best worst decision I ever made," Evan said with a slight smile. "It saved my life." "It saved mine too." Grace looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "How do you figure?" "I was drowning, Grace. I didn't see it because I was too busy treading water, but I was going under, working myself to death, barely keeping my kid fed, no hope for anything better. You didn't just give me a job, you gave me permission to want more, to believe I deserved more." He paused. "So yeah, you saved my life too." They stood there for a long moment, 2 people who'd been strangers and were now family, bound by that night and everything that had come after. Then Grace said, "I'm buying the diner." Evan blinked. "What?" "The one Liam loves. The one that serves pancakes the size of his head. It's been struggling financially, and the owner wants to sell. I'm going to buy it, keep the staff, and use it as a hiring ground for people in our program. Give them real jobs with real wages while they're going to school." "Grace, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you because you'll have to help me run it." She grinned. "We're expanding, Evan. Not just the scholarship fund, but the whole ecosystem around it. Jobs, childcare, housing assistance. Everything that makes the difference between surviving and thriving." That's huge. That's the point." Grace turned to face him fully. "We can't save everyone, but we can build something that helps enough people that it starts to matter. And maybe, just maybe, we can change how the world thinks about investing in human potential." Evan felt something swell in his chest. Pride, hope, purpose, all tangled together. "When do we start?" "We already have." They walked back to Harlow Industries together, talking logistics and dreaming big dreams. And Evan realized that this was what redemption looked like. Not a single moment of salvation, but 1,000 small choices to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep believing that broken things could be mended into something new and strong. That night, when he tucked Liam into bed, his son asked, "Daddy, are we happy now?" "Yeah, buddy, I think we are." "Good. I like being happy." "Me too." As Evan turned off the light, Liam's voice came soft through the darkness. "Daddy, I'm glad the storm happened, because it brought us Grace." Evan's throat tightened. "Me too, Liam. Me too." He closed the door and stood in the hallway of his real apartment with its solid walls and working heat, listening to the sounds of the city outside his window. Somewhere out there, Grace was in her penthouse, probably still working, still building, still fighting to turn her loss into something meaningful. Somewhere out there, 35 people were going to school because they'd been given a chance. And somewhere out there, more storms were coming. They always were. But Evan wasn't afraid anymore, because he'd learned that storms didn't just destroy, they revealed. They stripped away everything unnecessary and showed you what really mattered. And sometimes, if you were lucky, they brought you exactly the person you needed to find your way back to the light. The diner acquisition happened faster than Evan expected. By October, Grace had finalized the purchase, retained every single employee, and was already interviewing program participants for new positions. The place kept its name, Mel's 24-hour, and its character, but now it had a purpose beyond serving breakfast at 3 in the morning. It became a bridge, a place where people could work decent hours for decent pay while building towards something bigger. Evan found himself spending lunch hours there, reviewing applications between bites of pie that Mel himself still made from his grandmother's recipe. The old cook had been skeptical at first when some CEO lady bought his failing business, but Grace had won him over by asking for his input on everything and actually listening. Now Mel called her boss lady with genuine affection and made sure there was always fresh coffee when she came by. "Your boss lady's good people," Mel told Evan one afternoon, sliding a plate of fries across the counter. "Don't meet many rich folks who actually give a damn." "She's not really my boss anymore," Evan said. "We're partners on the program." "Even better. Means she trusts you." Mel wiped down the counter with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for 40 years. "You know what I think? I think you two saved each other. Whatever happened between you, it was meant to happen." Evan didn't correct him. Some stories were too complicated to explain, and besides, Mel wasn't wrong. They had saved each other in ways that went deeper than that night in the storm. November brought unexpected challenge. 3 of the program participants dropped out, overwhelmed by the demands of school and work and family. One woman called Evan in tears, apologizing like she'd let him down personally. "I can't do it," she sobbed. "I thought I could, but my daughter got sick and I missed 2 weeks of class, and now I'm so far behind. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Evan sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear, and felt the weight of her disappointment like it was his own. "Hey, listen to me. This isn't failure. This is life happening. You didn't let anyone down. But the scholarship? We'll be here when you're ready to try again. Maybe next semester, maybe next year. We're not going anywhere." He paused. "And in the meantime, we're going to connect you with our childcare resources. Your daughter needs you healthy and present, not stressed to the breaking point. Take care of her. Take care of yourself. The education will wait." After he hung up, Evan sat staring at his computer screen, thinking about all the ways the system was designed to make people fail. One sick kid shouldn't derail someone's entire future, but it did. One unexpected expense, one missed class, one moment of bad luck, and suddenly the ladder you were climbing got pulled away. He pulled up a new document and started typing. By the end of the day, he had a proposal for a crisis fund, emergency money for program participants facing unexpected hardships, medical bills, car repairs, temporary childcare, the kind of things that push people off the edge when they were already hanging by their fingernails. He took it to Grace that evening. She was in her office, surrounded by financial reports, looking tired in a way that had become familiar over the past year. She spent too much time working, too many hours trying to build something meaningful, as though staying busy could keep the ghosts at bay. Evan understood. He did the same thing. "We lost 3 more today," he said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Grace's face fell. "Who?" "Jessica Martinez, David Chen, and Alicia Roberts. All for different reasons, but they all come down to the same thing. Life got in the way, and they had no safety net." "What do you want to do about it?" Evan slid the proposal across her desk. "This, a crisis intervention fund. Not huge amounts, just enough to bridge gaps. 500 here for a car repair, 1,000 there for emergency childcare. Whatever it takes to keep people from having to choose between their education and survival." Grace read through it carefully, her expression thoughtful. When she looked up, there was something fierce in her eyes. "This is good. Really good. But Evan, we can't save everyone from every crisis. We don't have infinite resources." "I know, but we can try to save more than we're saving now. We can build a cushion so that one bad week doesn't destroy everything they're working toward." He leaned forward. "Grace, I almost gave up 100 times before you found me. The only reason I didn't was because I had a son depending on me. But what about the people who don't have that? Who just have themselves and their exhaustion and the weight of the world telling them they're not worth the effort? Those are the people who need this most. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, let's do it. I'll talk to the board next week. We'll find the funding. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're the one seeing what needs to be done. She paused. You know, when I first met you, or first remembered meeting you, anyway, I thought I was giving you something. But the truth is, you've given me more. Purpose, direction, a reason to build something that actually matters. We're building it together. Yeah, we are. The board approved the crisis fund in December, just in time for the holidays. They launched it quietly, no press release, no fanfare, just a resource that appeared on the program website and in the information packets sent to participants. Within a week, they'd helped 5 people. Within a month, that number tripled. Jessica Martinez, the woman who'd called in tears, came back in January, her daughter healthy and her determination renewed. She walked into Evan's office with her head high and said, "I'm ready to try again, if you'll have me." "We never stopped having you," Evan told her. "Welcome back." The scholarship program crossed a major milestone in February. 100 participants served. Grace organized a small celebration at Mel's, inviting everyone who'd been part of the journey. The diner was packed with single parents, support staff, volunteers, and board members who'd taken a chance on a crazy idea. Mel made his famous chocolate cake, and someone brought champagne, and for a few hours the room was full of laughter and hope and the kind of joy that came from knowing you'd done something real. Evan stood at the edge of the room, watching Liam teach Grace some complicated hand-clapping game that involved a lot of singing and even more giggling. His son had grown in the past year, taller, more confident, more secure in the knowledge that his life was stable. He had friends now. He joined the school chess club. He talked about wanting to be a paleontologist when he grew up, and Evan believed he actually could be. Janet appeared at his elbow with a glass of champagne. "You did good, Cole." "We did good. All of us." "Don't be modest. This was your vision. Grace provided the resources, but you provided the heart." She clinked her glass against his. "To second chances." "To second chances," Evan echoed. As the party wound down and people started to leave, Grace found Evan by the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, soft and clean, covering the city in white. "Can you believe it's been 15 months?" she asked. "Since the storm? Feels like longer." "Feels like yesterday." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "I've been thinking about Henry a lot lately, about what he'd think of all this." "He'd be proud of you." "I hope so. I hope he'd understand why it took me so long to start living again." She turned to look at Evan. "I spent 10 years being angry at the world for taking him from me. And then you showed up and reminded me that the world also gives things back. Not the same things. Not replacements, but new things. Different things. Things worth building." Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood beside her, watching the snow fall and feeling the weight of everything they'd survived together. Spring brought unexpected news. The program caught the attention of a national foundation interested in funding expansion into 3 more cities. Grace spent weeks negotiating terms, making sure they maintained control over the program's direction and values. Evan traveled with her to meetings, learning the language of grants and endowments and philanthropic partnerships. It was exhausting and exhilarating and sometimes terrifying, but it was also exactly what they dreamed about. "We're going national," Grace told him after one particularly grueling negotiation. They were in a hotel bar in Chicago, both too wired from the day's meetings to sleep. "This is really happening. Are you ready for it?" "Are you?" Evan considered the question. A year ago, he'd been a night security guard with no prospects and no hope. Now he was co-directing a program that was about to help thousands of people across the country. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt inevitable. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." They clinked glasses, water for him, wine for her, and Evan noticed that Grace's hands weren't shaking. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked at peace with herself. The shadows that had haunted her eyes that first night were gone, replaced by something steadier. Something like contentment. The national expansion launched in June with programs in Chicago, Atlanta, and Phoenix. Evan spent weeks training new coordinators, sharing everything he'd learned about what worked and what didn't. Grace hired a full-time operations director to handle the day-to-day logistics, which freed Evan up to focus on the human side, the stories, the struggles, the successes that couldn't be measured in spreadsheets. He started writing about the program, first just internal memos and then actual articles for nonprofit publications. His writing was raw and honest, filled with the kind of hard-earned wisdom that only came from living through hardship. One piece, about the hidden costs of poverty that most people never considered, went viral. Suddenly, Evan was getting interview requests, speaking invitations, people asking him to consult on their programs. "You're becoming famous," Liam said one evening, looking at his father's name in an online article. "That's so cool." "I'm not famous, buddy. I just told some stories." "But people are listening. That's what matters, right? The people hear the stories, and maybe they'll help other people like Grace helped us." Out of the mouths of babes. Evan pulled his son into a hug and thought about how much this boy had taught him about resilience and hope and seeing the good in the world, even when the world hadn't always been good to them. Summer brought change to Evan's personal life, too. He started dating, tentatively, awkwardly, like a man who'd forgotten how to be anything other than a father and a worker. Grace encouraged him, even set him up with a friend of hers, though that particular date had been a disaster of incompatible personalities and awkward silences. "I'm sorry," Grace said afterward, wincing. "I thought you two would hit it off." "It's okay. I'm not sure I'm ready anyway. Sarah wouldn't want you to be alone forever." "I'm not alone. I have Liam. I have you. I have this whole life we've built." You know what I mean. Evan did know, but the truth was he'd become comfortable in his life as it was, full of purpose and friendship and the quiet satisfaction of doing meaningful work. Romance felt like something from a different life, one he wasn't sure he wanted to return to. At least not yet. The one-year anniversary of his promotion came in September, and with it, another surprise. Janet called him into her office with a grin that meant trouble. Corporate wants to create a new position, VP of Social Impact, someone to oversee all of Harlow Industries' community programs and partnerships, someone who understands the work from the ground up. She leaned back in her chair. "They want you." Evan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Janet, I'm not. If you say you're not qualified, I'm going to throw something at you. You've built a nationally recognized program from scratch. You've secured major foundation funding. You've become the face of corporate social responsibility done right. You're not just qualified, you're overqualified. Take the damn job." "What about the scholarship program?" "You'll still oversee it, just as part of a larger portfolio. We're expanding into affordable housing, job training, financial literacy, all the things that create real opportunity. And you're going to lead it." Evan thought about the night security guard he'd been, walking home through storms because he couldn't afford a bus pass. He thought about the man who'd carried a drunk stranger to safety without knowing it would change his life. He thought about every person who'd ever told him he wasn't worth investing in and how wrong they'd all been. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." The promotion came with a salary that made Evan's head spin. It also came with an office on the executive floor right down the hall from Grace. His first day in that office, he stood at the window looking out over the city and thought about perspective. How different the world looked when you were standing on the top floor instead of walking through its streets. But he promised himself he'd never forget what those streets felt like. Never forget what it meant to be invisible, to be struggling, to be one emergency away from losing everything. October brought the 2-year anniversary of the storm. This time, Evan and Grace marked it deliberately, taking the day off to visit the intersection where everything had changed. Someone had planted flowers in the median since they'd been there last. Marigolds and chrysanthemums that blazed orange and gold in the autumn sun. 2 years, Grace said, touching one of the flowers gently. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. It was another lifetime. We're different people now. Better people? I think so. At least people who are trying to be better. Grace was quiet for a moment, then, "I've been thinking about writing a book. About losing Henry, about the years I spent drowning, about that night and everything after, about how sometimes the people you save end up saving you. You should do it. Will you help me? I don't mean write it for me, but help me remember things accurately. Help me make sure I'm telling the truth, and not just the version that makes me look good." Grace, You don't need me for that. You've never been afraid of the truth. I need you because you were there. You saw me at my worst, and you didn't turn away. That perspective matters. So they started meeting once a week, usually at Mel's, where Grace would bring her laptop and Evan would bring his memories, and together they'd piece together a story about loss and redemption and the strange alchemy that turned strangers into family. The book took shape slowly, honestly, without the polish of professional memoir, but with the raw authenticity of lived experience. Liam turned 9 in November with a party that would have been impossible 2 years ago. They rented space at a local community center, invited his entire class, and watched as 20 kids destroyed a dinosaur-shaped cake and played games until they were exhausted and sugar crashed. Grace came with a present that made Liam's eyes go wide, a junior paleontologist kit complete with rock hammer and field guide. "This is the best present ever," Liam threw his arms around her. "Thank you, Aunt Grace." Evan watched them and felt something shift in his chest. This was family now. Not the one he'd been born into or the one he'd built with Sarah, but the one he'd found in the aftermath of storms and second chances. It was smaller than he'd once imagined, but it was also exactly enough. The holidays came with their usual chaos. Evan and Liam spent Thanksgiving at Grace's penthouse again, this time with a bigger crowd. Janet and her husband, Marcus, and his new girlfriend, several program participants who'd become friends, and Mrs. Chen, who brought enough dumplings to feed them all twice over. The apartment was loud with laughter and full of people who'd all, in one way or another, been given second chances. After dinner, while Liam and Marcus's girlfriend taught everyone a complicated card game that involved more shouting than actual rules, Grace pulled Evan aside onto her balcony. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. "I have something for you," Grace said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "Don't open it now. Open it at home after Liam's asleep." "Grace, if this is money—" "It's not. Just trust me. Open it later." That night, after Liam was tucked in bed and dreaming of dinosaurs, Evan sat on his couch and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a deed, to a house. A real house with a yard and 3 bedrooms, and an address in a neighborhood with good schools. His hands shook as he read the note attached. "This isn't charity, it's ownership. The house is yours, paid in full. Not because I feel guilty or because I'm trying to save you, but because you saved me, and this is the only way I know to say thank you for giving me my life back, for reminding me that Henry would want me to keep living, for being the kind of friend I didn't know I needed. The house is in Liam's name, with you as trustee. Whatever happens to either of us, he has something stable, something permanent, something that says he matters." Evan sat in the quiet of his apartment and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, of mattering, of having someone care enough to make sure his son would be okay no matter what. He called Grace even though it was late. She answered on the first ring. "Did you open it?" "Grace, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can, and you will, because you've given me so much more than money can measure, and this is the only tangible thing I can give back." "But no buts. The papers are already filed. The house is Liam's. Take him to see it this weekend. Let him pick out his room. Let him have the childhood he deserves." Her voice softened. "Let yourself have a home, Evan. A real one. You've earned it 1,000 times over." That weekend, Evan took Liam to see the house. It was in a quiet neighborhood with trees lining the streets and kids riding bikes in the fading afternoon light. The house itself was perfect. Not too big, not too fancy, just right. Liam ran through every room, his voice echoing off walls that would soon hold their memories. "Can I really pick any room?" he asked, eyes wide. "Any room except the master bedroom. That one's mine." Liam chose the one with the window overlooking the backyard, already planning where his dinosaur posters would go and how he'd arrange his books. Evan stood in the doorway, watching his son claim this space, this piece of permanence, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Security. Not just financial security, but the deep, bone-level certainty that they were going to be okay, that the ground beneath their feet was solid, that the future held possibilities instead of just survival. They moved in January, on a day when the sun was bright and the air was cold, and Mrs. Chen came with her nephew's truck to help transport their modest belongings. Grace showed up in jeans and a Harlow Industries t-shirt, ready to help carry boxes. Janet brought sandwiches. Marcus brought beer. It was messy and chaotic and perfect. By evening, Liam's room was set up and the kitchen was functional, and Evan stood in his own living room in his own house, and felt like maybe he'd finally made it to the other side of whatever storm had been chasing him since Sarah died. That night, after everyone had gone home and Liam was asleep in his new room, Evan sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee and looked at the stars. He thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, walking through that storm with nothing but exhaustion and determination. He thought about Grace, stumbling drunk into traffic, ready to let the pain win. He thought about how many small choices and moments of Grace had led them both to this moment. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "House looks good. You look good in it. Sleep well in your new home." He typed back, "Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me, for saving me, for showing me that life after loss is still worth living." Evan smiled and set his phone aside, breathing in the cold night air and feeling the weight of 2 years of transformation settle into his bones. They'd both been broken that night in the storm. They'd both been drowning in their own ways. But they'd found each other in the chaos, and somehow that had been enough to pull them both back from the edge. Spring brought the book launch. Grace's memoir, titled After the Storm, became a surprise bestseller, its honest account of grief and redemption resonating with thousands of readers. She did interviews and book tours, always careful to protect Evan and Liam's privacy, but never shying away from the truth of how they'd saved each other. The publicity brought more attention to the scholarship program, more funding, more opportunities to expand. By summer, the program was operating in 8 cities with plans to add 5 more by year's end. They'd helped over 400 people return to school. The Crisis Intervention Fund had prevented countless dropouts. The network of support they'd built, childcare, housing, job placement, financial counseling, was becoming a model for how corporate social responsibility could actually create change. Evan was promoted again, this time to senior vice president. He tried to refuse. It felt like too much, too fast, but Grace just laughed and told him to stop underestimating himself. So he took the position and the responsibility that came with it, and he threw himself into the work with the same determination that had carried him through every other impossible thing he'd ever done. Liam thrived in their new neighborhood. He made friends, joined Little League, and started talking about going to college someday to study paleontology. Evan watched his son grow and flourish and felt grateful every single day for the storm that had changed their trajectory. The second anniversary of the storm's anniversary, effectively the 3-year mark of that fateful night, came in October with another gathering at the intersection. But this time, it wasn't just Evan and Grace. It was program participants, staff members, board members, and volunteers. They planted a tree in the median, a young oak that would grow and strengthen with time, its roots digging deep into the ground that had once held nothing but concrete. Grace gave a speech about second chances and the courage it took to accept help. Evan spoke about the importance of investing in people who society had written off, and then they invited others to share their stories. The single mom who'd become a nurse, the dad who'd retrained as a teacher, the young parent who was now running their own business. Story after story of transformation. Of people who'd been given a chance and had seized it with both hands. Of lives changed not by handouts, but by genuine support and belief that they were worth the investment. As the sun set and the crowd began to disperse, Grace and Evan stood beside the young oak tree, its leaves rustling in the autumn breeze. "You know what I realized?" Grace said quietly. "That night wasn't about you saving me. It was about the universe putting us exactly where we needed to be so we could save each other." "You believe in the universe now?" "I believe in possibility, in the fact that sometimes terrible things happen that lead to beautiful things, in the idea that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story." She touched the tree's slender trunk. "This will be here long after we're gone, growing, providing shade, being proof that something good can take root in the hardest places." "Like us," Evan said. "Like us." They walked back to the car together, 2 people who'd been strangers and were now family, bound by that night and everything that had come after. The city stretched around them, full of storms and stars and people fighting their own battles. But somewhere in all that chaos, there was hope. There was possibility. There was proof that second chances were real if you were brave enough to take them. That night, Evan tucked Liam into bed in their house with its solid walls and its working heat and its future full of promise. His son was almost asleep when he mumbled, "Daddy?" "Yeah, buddy?" "I'm glad about the storm. I know that's weird, but I am. Because it brought us here." Evan kissed his son's forehead. "Me too, Liam. Me too." He turned off the light and stood in the hallway, listening to the sounds of his home, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the heater, the gentle breathing of his sleeping child. Outside, the city hummed with life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people who needed help, new opportunities to build something meaningful. But tonight there was just this: peace, security, and the quiet knowledge that they'd made it through. The storms hadn't destroyed them. They'd revealed who they really were and what they were capable of becoming. And in the aftermath, they'd built something better than either of them could have built alone: a life worth living, a program worth fighting for, and a friendship that had become the foundation of everything else. Evan walked to his own room, looked out the window at the stars above his neighborhood, and thought about Grace in her penthouse doing the same thing. Two people who'd pulled each other from darkness. Two lives transformed by a single moment of choosing to run toward danger instead of away from it. Some people you rescue once, he thought, remembering Grace's words from years ago. Others you rescue forever, and sometimes the person you pull from the rain is the one who teaches you how to live again. Tomorrow, they'd keep building. They'd help more people, plant more trees, create more opportunities for second chances. But tonight, Evan let himself simply exist in the gratitude of having survived, having thrived, having found meaning in the wreckage. The storm had passed, the sun had risen, and in the golden light of everything they'd built together, Evan Cole finally understood what it meant to be home.